Okay, this is a conversation about paradigms, and eventually paradigms and you. But first, we're going to talk about what is a paradigm, what's the definition, we'll give you a couple of examples. What's a paradigm shift? What's paradigm paralysis? And then we'll kind of get to you on an individual level. So what is a paradigm? In 1962, a scientist by the name of Thomas Kuhn wrote a paper called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And this was a sea change in the sense of he developed kind of a timeline of how science changes over time using the concept of paradigms. And, basically, to simplify it, he said, science, normal science has kind of a way of looking at the world and in which most of the phenomena are explainable using a certain worldview. Then kind of what happens over a period of time is things start kind of popping up that the old paradigm, the old way of looking at the world, doesn't explain very well. And then more and more of these things pop up, and then eventually there is kind of a crisis, where this thing is not explaining things well at all, and then there's a revolution and a new paradigm, a new way of looking at things. And this process goes on and on and on. Although he was using it primarily to explain science and how science changes over time, the concept is sort of went viral and is now used in music and social sciences and whatever. The word paradigm shift and so forth has become, it's used in business. So what's an example? Okay, well, for a long time people thought explained the world by the world was flat. Okay, and this worked for quite a while. People weren't traveling around that much, and they had maps, and there's the edge of the earth, and there's monsters there, all these sort of things. But people began observing, as ships went out from port, you could see the ship sort of disappearing and the mast would still be sticking up. Well, that's kind of hard to explain if things are level. Okay, so this and other phenomena, began to impinge on that paradigm, and you had to come up with something that made a little bit more sense, like, the earth is spherical. But, there's always resistance to new paradigms. I've got a cartoon here that shows Columbus sailing toward the edge of the earth, and people saying, "Hey, Columbus, any more dumb theories?" as they approach the edge of the earth. And then another one, which is much more modern, where it says, "It's sea level, not sea curve." So people come up with, really, there are people who still are promoting the flat earth theory, despite all evidence to the contrary. So even when the paradigm shifts, some people don't shift with it. They want to hold on to the old stuff. That's one example. Here's another one where immediately you're faced with a bit of a dilemma. You're faced with, are these two wine goblets, one white and one black, or are they two faces? Well, in fact, it's both. But there's a bit of a, wait a minute, what am I looking at? Because we're kind of prepared to see one or the other. These are just really simple examples. So a paradigm shift is really a change from one way of thinking about things to another way of thinking about things. It's really that simple. So let's talk we'll go into some famous paradigms and paradigm shifts. So Nicholas Copernicus, revolutionary change in science, because Ptolemy had a theory that the sun and all the planets rotated around the earth. Okay? And this went on, I mean, this was accepted for many, many centuries. And then, Copernicus, and this is usually what happens, started really observing things closely and said, well, that doesn't work. The motions of the planets just did not fit Ptolemy's paradigm. So he proposed that the Earth and all the other planets went around the sun. And that was very controversial. Both Copernicus and Galileo came to be seen as the fathers of the scientific revolution, but they were also heretics. They were condemned. People thought they were crazy and didn't believe them, and they were, So here's a picture of the world according to Ptolemy, where you see the sun or the earth in the middle. And in some ways that's a very satisfying explanation. We want to be the center of the universe. We want the earth to be the center of the universe. Sort of an egotistical view of things. He would have really freaked out now as we discover we're like a speck of dust in 100 million trillion stars, and our solar system and even the galaxy we're in is pretty minuscule when you really start looking out there at space. But they didn't have to worry about that. And then here you have the Copernicus and Galileo's view, which is the view we have now of the sun in the middle and the planets rotating around them. And then I have a nice cartoon, because cartoons are kind of fun, where Galileo is describing his discoveries to the church. And you see the thought bubble, above Galileo's head. He's looking at all the, the craters on the moon. The bishop who's explaining it to it, the thought bubble above his head, he has a stick and he's beating Galileo, And Galileo was declared a heretic by the church for proposing these absurd theories, which contradicted what the church had been putting out. Okay, well, here's another one. So that was definitely a huge paradigm shift, the earth being the center versus the sun being the center. As we know from the scientific revolution in astronomy has gone on and on and on. It seems like almost every year or every 2 or 3 years we have to do some refiguring, about how the universe really works, how old it is, how far apart things are, black holes, and all those kinds of things. Darwin, a little bit more modern. Darwin, of course, revolutionized science by putting forth the idea of evolution in his book called The Origin of Species. And the idea and his scientific proof that human beings had animal ancestors and evolved over time was, and really still is, very controversial in some quarters. We have arguments in schools in the United States whether evolution should be taught, by some people, even though it's pretty clear. And you see here a picture of Darwin, and you also see a cartoon of Darwin with an ape's body and Darwin's head. I mean, they hated him for suggesting that the noble man could have evolved from a lowly animal.
The Times is very positive.
I should think so. It's Huxley. The Athenaeum wants me tried in the Divinity Hall, the college, the lecture room and museum. My book is no more unorthodox than the subject demands. I don't discuss the origins of man. I don't discuss Genesis.
Charles, don't be so naive. It's clear you think man is no exception. Whether you're right or wrong, you must finish what you started.
Owen! Owen! Ah, Owen!
How dare you? How dare you paint me as a reactionary?
I didn't paint you as a
Dare you
reactionary.
put my name with the defenders of immutability? Is my concept of the ordained continuous becoming of living things to be ignored?
But what does it mean? I don't know what it means.
It
means animals appearing out of thin air.
Not at all. Oh, you believe that selection is the only possible creative law. Pure chance, the roll of the dice. In fact, new species are created by natural birth according to God's law.
Well, I don't
I know
believe...
this puts you up to this. Huxley.
Please, Richard.
Well, I will have absolutely no truck with the Huxleys of this world, and nor should you. It is an abuse of science. You should be ashamed of yourself. Your book is a snub to the clergy and an insult to humanity. It's nihilism. Only a man devoid of a soul could find solace in a bestial ancestry.
So again, paradigm shift, but they're not always accepted. Einstein, okay, can't leave out Einstein. So Einstein came up when he was a fairly young man with the theory of relativity. He overturned the previous scientific paradigms of Isaac Newton, you know, the laws of motion that Newton had proposed, and gravitation, that had been accepted for over 300 years. He showed that gravity could bend light, that atoms smashed together could produce massive energy. The practical applications from Einstein's revolutionary theories are atomic energy, the GPS system, television, space travel, semiconductors, and of course, the one he wasn't very happy about, the atom bomb.
But at his summer home on Long Island, Albert Einstein was hearing about a frightening development in physics from an old friend, Leo Szilard. That afternoon, Szilard persuaded Einstein to help launch a drive for the ultimate weapon, the atom bomb.
So his ideas were one of the greatest scientific paradigm shifts in the 20th century. I mean, it really revolutionized science. And here's a cartoon again. So here's somebody, Einstein, at a bar, and the bartender is saying to him, "Space is curved and time is relative." "Yeah, okay, I'm calling you a cab right now, buddy." Okay, so, and still, I would guess that the majority of people on the planet don't understand relativity. I mean, really don't understand, although we are the beneficiaries of that paradigm shift. Here's another one, Freud. And you know, the interesting thing about Freud and many of these thinkers who had these really revolutionary ideas is once the paradigm shift occurs, you say, so what? It doesn't seem revolutionary because everybody's accepted it, okay? But at the time of the shift, it's pretty, you know, outrageous and pretty controversial. So Freud's concept of the unconscious was revolutionary. The idea that the unconscious mind, you know, things that you were not aware of but were in your unconscious mind could affect your behavior. That was revolutionary. It isn't anymore, but it was a huge change in psychology. So the idea that things can be repressed, that you can have an experience and it can be repressed into your unconscious, but still remain there and then reappear some way or another in your behavior. The interpretation of dreams. Now, the interpretation of dreams goes back. I mean, when you go to Epidaurus in Greece, ancient Greece, and where Aesculapius, the mythical medical healer of Greece, practiced, he had a place where you would go into this place and lie there, and and then you would have your dreams interpreted. So it goes along for quite a while. But the idea of these unconscious drives was something that was really quite different, and that the dreams might be revealing things that were happening in your unconscious that you could not communicate consciously.
I discovered some important new facts about the unconscious in psychic life, the role of instinctual urges, and so on. Out of these findings grew a new science, psychoanalysis, a part of psychology, and a new method of treatment of the neurosis. I had to pay heavily for this bit of good luck. People did not believe in my facts and thought my theories unsavory. Resistance was strong and unrelenting.
The other thing with Freud is his students, Jung, Adler, Otto Rank, all had his students went on to have a very profound effect on modern psychology. And here we have another cartoon, of course, and this is if Freud analyzed dog dreams. So we have Freud, we have the dog on the couch, and the guy is saying, when you whine and your left leg twitches, you're dreaming of chasing a rabbit. Okay, so anyhow, the classic thing is with Freudian psychology is somebody on the couch having their dreams interpreted. Okay, let's talk about a much more modern paradigm shift. Neuroplasticity. Up until probably 20 years ago, the conventional wisdom was that the brain was hardwired, that neural pathways that were established as your brain developed were fixed and could not change. Old dogs can't learn new tricks, or old people can't learn new things. Dr. Michael Merzenich and other neuroscientists conducted experiments, many, many different kinds of experiments, which showed this was untrue. I've used the example of people who were blind, and the area of the brain for the visual center of the brain is about 35% of the brain. It's huge. But people who are blind, obviously, no signals are going to that, shouldn't be going to that part of the brain, at least from the eyes. What they discovered is essentially the brain rewired itself and took things from the fingers and sent them to the visual cortex for processing. The brain just said, okay, I've got a lot of capacity here, and Bill needs information which he's going to get through his hands, so we're just going to rewire and use all that unused capacity. That's amazing. So all of a sudden the idea of this hardwired brain changed, and there was experiment after experiment after experiment which showed that the brain is in fact plastic, that it can rewire itself if we give it, pay attention and give it certain exercises. The brain can rewire itself. Amazing. And that the brain does not can continue to produce new brain cells throughout a person's life, so it isn't like it's this constant decline.
For many years, scientists have thought the brain was fixed and hardwired and couldn't change after childhood. But recent research shows this is simply not the case at all, and we know that people's brains can change well into old age. In fact, our brains change every day. Our brains are considered to be plastic or pliable, and this has helped neuroscientists coin the term neuroplasticity. So how does neuroplasticity work? Well, think of your brain as a huge city with thousands of roads and lots of traffic. Some of these roads are faster than others, with lots of traffic moving quickly and easily. These roads with all their traffic represent our established ways of thinking, feeling and doing. Every time we think, feel or do something in the same way, we strengthen this road, making it faster, and it becomes quicker and easier for our brains to travel this pathway. But by contrast, if a road wasn't built well in the first place, or becomes blocked, or we think, feel or do something differently, we start to use a different pathway. If we keep using that new road, our brains begin to use this pathway more and more, and this new way of thinking, feeling or doing becomes automatic. In the meantime, the old pathway gets less and less use and weakens. In other cases, it may be possible to repair or rebuild a blocked pathway. This process of rewiring your brain by strengthening existing pathways, making new ones, weakening old ones, and repairing broken ones is neuroplasticity in action.
Let's talk about something that's more familiar to us, the therapeutic community. So, back in the 50s and before then, the conventional wisdom was once an addict, always an addict. There was no cure for addiction. There were a lot of medical experiments. The federal government had a couple of things what they called narcotic farms, where they tried all kinds of different things, LSD therapy, all kinds of bizarre treatments, as well as conventional psychotherapy, as well as, other things. And it was a blank. Nothing worked. What happened? Addicts themselves came together and formed Synanon, which was the first American therapeutic community, and turned that conventional wisdom on its head. Using some of the concepts from Alcoholics Anonymous, addicts came together without medical guidance, without psychiatric or psychological guidance, and developed the first intervention to deal with drug addiction and create a methodology for transforming lives and identities. And the therapeutic community was a paradigm shift. In other words, from once an addict, always an addict, to now, the word is typically used as recovery. But we really talk about it as a transformation of a person, a change in their identity. It isn't just they stop using drugs. It changed globally in many, many, many dimensions. And over the past 50, 60 years, the therapeutic community movement has transformed lives all over the world. There's an association of therapeutic communities on every continent except Antarctica. And millions of people have been helped using a method which did not come from the academic community at all. It came out of the experience and the wisdom of the people who were in fact afflicted by the condition.
The Therapeutic Community for Addictions began in Santa Monica, California in 1958. It spread quickly from the West Coast to the East Coast and then across the country. By 1972, the Ford Foundation had identified 2,600 organizations in the United States whose roots could be traced to that very first therapeutic community. In the past few decades, the therapeutic community has become an international phenomenon, crossing both oceans and spreading to every continent, spreading a message of self-reliance, mutual self-help, dignity and empowerment for all people, and giving hope and inspiration particularly to those in society who've been marginalized and disenfranchised.
The legacy of slavery, and we can look at white supremacy as a paradigm. The United States of America, a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Right? Sound familiar? But it began as a slave society. What can rightly be called original sin. You know, the original sin of the United States. There was the enslavement of black Africans and the genocide of Native Americans. So for many decades, almost from the beginning of this country, both foreign observers and domestic observers have commented on the disconnect between America's ideals, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, equal justice under the law, so forth and so on, and its actual acceptance and reinforcement and practice of a system of racial subordination.
And of course, race, the vicious legacy of white supremacy, has been for so long a dogma in American history. We hit it hard in 1861, we hit it again in the 1960s, but for the most part, it's still one of those tacit assumptions and presuppositions we'd rather sidestep and hold at arm's length.
So recent writers like Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow, and Brian Stevenson, who created the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, have traced the history of slavery from slavery, or racism, from slavery to Reconstruction, to lynching and domestic terrorism against African Americans, to Jim Crow, systematic discrimination, to mass incarceration. And here we are today with our entire country on every city, every large city in the country on fire because of another killing of an unarmed black man, and this goes on. I mean, the police in some ways have become the new lynching, where people who are innocent of any crime can be killed, and most of the time there are no consequences for the killer. So we have a racial paradigm, and it's Black Lives Don't Matter. Okay? And what Brian Stevenson has said is, while the laws and practices have changed over time, over the past 200-300 years, the narrative of black inferiority remains the same. In other words, the forms have changed, but the essence of this narrative of white superiority, black inferiority, has remained constant throughout American history. So protests, which we're in the middle of now, pledges by political leaders, even widespread rioting, which has happened more than once in our country over this, many times in fact, has not fundamentally changed the unequal treatment of people of color. And we see it in so many ways, in terms of education, in terms of health care, in terms of employment, and in terms of how they're treated by the criminal justice system. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners, and most of that 25% are minorities. They're black or brown people. That is a paradigm which has, as they say, has legs. It's very, very hard to root out. And it is addressed and then left to the side and continues on. It's a battle for Americans in the past, in the present, and presumably in the future, to fight for the ideal of equality, actual equality, people being treated equally under the law. Would we have the words? We do not have the commitment to doing that and the practice of doing that. The clip you're going to see of Malcolm X is connected. He spoke right after this terrible bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, of a church. 4 little girls were killed in that bombing. And so you really see his his anger, his frustration with the inability of the government to protect its citizens.
One white man named Lincoln supposedly fought the Civil War to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Then another white man named Kennedy came along running for president and told Negroes what all he was going to do for them if they voted for him, and they voted for him 80%. He's been in office now for 3 years, and the problem is still here. When police dogs were biting black women and black children and black babies in Birmingham, Alabama, that Kennedy talked about what he couldn't do because no federal law had been violated. And as soon as the Negroes exploded and began to protect themselves and got the best of the crackers in Birmingham, then Kennedy sent for the troops. And there was no, he didn't have any new law when he sent for the troops. When the Negroes erupted, than he had at the time when whites were erupting. So we are within our rights and with justice, with justification, when we express doubt concerning the ability of the white man to solve our problem, and also when we express doubt concerning his integrity, concerning his sincerity. Because you will have to confess that the problem has been around here for a long time, and whites have been saying the same thing about it for the past 100 years, and it's no nearer a solution today than it was 100 years ago.
Well, in some ways, let's talk about the big one, the climate crisis. For much of human history, people had a very deep respect for nature and understood that the natural world and humans were equal and interdependent. Guarding and respecting the environment was a crucial value for indigenous people. Plants, animals, and the natural environment were considered kin, brothers and sisters, and often referred to that way. When you look at what we're mostly familiar with as Native Americans in this country, there was an enormous respect for the natural world. It was something, the stories of the ceremonial nature of taking an animal's life. It gave its life for me, and this generosity toward the gifts of nature, and this enormous respect for not defiling nature or spoiling it. By polluting it or treating it in a way that it could not recover from. This is someone who's the director of forestry policy and resources at the United Nations. Many indigenous peoples and local communities cannot imagine their life divorced from nature, and their interest in the sustainable use of resources is very, very strong. Well, so that's a paradigm, that we're part of nature, that we must respect it like we respect ourselves and each other. But two things really precipitated something very different. First, the religious ideology and the scientific revolution. So I'm going to read something to you from the Bible. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea," dominion, "and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and all over the earth, and all over every creeping thing that creepeth on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air," and da-da-da-da-da, okay? So this idea that man was above nature, and not really part of nature, and that our God-given right here in writing was to dominate the earth, to subdue it, and to use it however we chose to that would benefit us in our own minds. And if it didn't benefit the earth, it didn't benefit the plants, it didn't benefit the other animals, well, you know, that's tough because we are the super, you know, we are meant to have this power. If we wiped out a species of animals, tough luck if it benefited us, okay? If we destroyed a natural habitat, well, you know, if it was useful and valuable to us, go ahead and do it. God told you it's okay. Okay, so that's one thing. And then we have science. And the scientific method, let's say, you know, around the 16th, 17th century, the acceleration of scientific discoveries was on steroids and hasn't stopped. But the scientific method encouraged the belief, which kind of dovetailed with the religious belief, that man could and should remake the world for his or her convenience. So nature should really be enslaved for our benefit. So science transformed us from a servant of nature to an exploiter of nature, and a tamer of nature, and then an improver of nature, okay? Now, not all this is bad, but, you know, just begin to think about it where we start looking at the natural world, not as this incredible creation that we are part of, but, you know, well, how can, you know, let's change those plants so they produce more. You know, everything we started looking at in the world was something, well, how can we change it? How can we improve it? So both science and economics, and of course this drove economics as well. You know, science, as we were able to change things and to our pleasure, that gave an economic incentive for doing more of it, you know. And so, you know, you really think nature becomes something to overcome, different from human civilization. So, you know, we need, let's dam those rivers. Well, what happened to all the fish? What happened to the flooding that replenished farmlands around, you know, the annual flooding that would take place? Let's start farming with chemicals. We can get more product, and then those chemicals run off into the rivers and poison them, and poison the land. The use of many of these chemicals, which are toxic, and destroy the soil. You know. Then factory farming. Oh, well, you know, instead of having our animals out there roaming around eating grass, let's contain them in these huge feedlots. And then because they're all crammed together, what do we have to do? We have to feed them antibiotics and growth hormone and things like that to commercialize this and make more money. The economic thing begins to drive it, but science helps us discover how to do it, how to do all these things. Industrial production and all the toxic byproducts of it. We have basically used the atmosphere like a huge garbage dump. We just throw things up there, you know, belching smokestacks, coal, ash, the drilling for oil, and extracting oil, and then burning these fossil fuels, which of course creates carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is the cause of global warming. So, in some ways, the climate thing, you know, the first Earth Day was 50 years ago, 1970. And it was the beginning, it really coincided with us seeing the Earth for the first time from space. You know, no political boundaries on it. this beautiful, incredible planet. And also we're getting a little bit more sophisticated in terms of astronomy, and we're discovering, like, man, all these other planets look terrible. They have no atmosphere, they're just rocks, or they're covered with noxious gases. I mean, you know, totally uninhabitable. And then we look at this incredible planet, this gift that through no effort on ours we have inherited, that make life beautiful and abundant if we take care of it. And so there was a real change in consciousness for hundreds of millions of people around the world. Then what happened? The fossil fuel industry went right to work. And the politicians who are paid off by that, and by their fear of rocking the boat and telling people the truth, which is we're going to have to change the way we live. We're going to have to change some of these things. We can't continue. The way we're living is unsustainable. We're going to destroy our habitat. And we know from nature what happens when a life form destroys its habitat. It dies. So we were ready for a paradigm shift, but that paradigm shift was hijacked by the fossil fuel industry and by the people who are influenced by it economically. And economically becomes ideology. So this is the crisis that we're facing now. Can we make this paradigm shift, in some ways almost back to the indigenous worldview, that we are part of nature and we have to respect it? And that if we don't respect it, it will not sustain us. And we can, in fact, make the earth uninhabitable for human life and for other life as well. We know that we're killing millions of species every year through our wanton destruction and lack of respect for nature.
A plant life means a lot to us because that's the source of our life. Without the plants, we couldn't make it. We have to have the plants for medicinal purpose as well as for our food. Then we have to have the ability to know which is good and which isn't. So I lived like that, and so now that I'm in my 80s, I feel that I have to protect the country and keep praying in my heart that we have all the necessity to make the country beautiful and green and productive for all of us.
In our tradition, we were taught that, you know, we have to take care of this land. We're all part of this. We're all in this together. The trees, the animals, the humans, all of us, the birds, we all have to do our part.
The way I look at it, you know, I'm a stranger here. I have to ask permission from my ancestors from here before I can say what I want to say. So I tell the Creator that I'm glad that I come here to such a beautiful place.
We have retained that concept that we're only going to be here for a little while, but we're going to leave this for our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, for all of our relatives that are going to come. We can either take care of this and teach them how to take care of this, and we'll have this for many, many generations, or we can destroy it now, and our people will die.
We've always looked down on the soil because it furnishes everything. It doesn't only furnish, it furnishes the timber, the food, all things comes from the ground. We honor just about everything because everything, I understand, is connected. All people are connected, and plants, even the animals of the forest and the fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, the reptiles.
in part one, we talked about a lot of major paradigms in science and social paradigms. And in part two, we really want to talk about personal paradigms and paradigm shifts, because that's really what Amity is about. It gives you the opportunity to have a change in your identity, to change from one way of being in the world and looking at the world and viewing yourself to another one which is really different. And you're going to see some a couple of historical clips, and then we're going to go into some people, contemporary people, and they're going to describe their paradigm shift. So what does a paradigm shift sound like? Okay, that's for you to listen for. To how does someone do this really remarkable thing where they go from one identity to another, which is so rarely done. It's really interesting. I mean, years and years and years ago, I remember talking to someone who is, I think, a very esteemed professor of psychology, and he said, look, adults don't really change, okay? They get started on a path and they basically stay on it unless there's some kind of a real crisis in their lives. And then sometimes there'll be a change, sometimes there isn't. So, but people can actually decide in community, and it really helps in community because you have all this reinforcement for you can do it. You're around other people who have done it, and you meet people who have the same story that you have, essentially, or many of the elements of their story before they had this transformative paradigm shift experience. And you can say, and what is the thing that people say? If I can do it, you can do it. And that is such an encouraging, affirmative statement to make, because it gives people the confidence to take this enormous leap of faith in their lives that they can really, and many people, and you'll see on the video you're going to see, just feel locked into this very dark path in their lives, and they have been told you're always going to be like that. You're never going to change. You're never going to be trusted. You're never going to be reliable. No one's ever going to need you or count on you or really care about you in any sincere way. And to overcome that message, those messages, which are so powerful, and many times because of skin color or other conditions, there's a whole societal paradigm that is bearing down on you to reinforce this. So in community, to find the encouragement, the hope, the support to make these shifts is really miraculous. And all the years I've been working in this, I just say, man, there's some magic that happens in community. And you're going to have an opportunity to see that. And then I hope after you see this to really talk about it. And in your own personal terms, what do you need to do to have that paradigm shift?
And I had tried different ways of cleaning up from drug abuse and prostitution 25 years ago. For about 4 years I tried before I was ever able to do so. And I never met a person who was successful at doing it until 1967. And I had been to Lexington, Kentucky, been a part of the LSD experiments with LSD and hypnosis, and left there in worse shape than I went in. I had been in state hospitals because that's all there was. There just weren't any other places. So I think that the role model, the concept of role modeling was the most important for me at first. There were no role models there. There were people in uniforms. There were people telling you what to do. You would see a psychiatrist once a week or every other week if you acted out and you know, stamped your feet or threw a little tantrum. And the purpose of that was to get more medication. I went to private psychiatrist. I had myself committed to a state hospital because there was no place else to go. The psychiatrist always wound up writing prescriptions. In Lexington, the same thing happened. I always had sleeping medication. I always had tranquilizers during the day. And the belief that I was hopeless was always reconfirmed. The way that I felt about myself was reconfirmed because the message was that I was hopeless and I couldn't get through a day without some kind of medication. The pain was too great. And the LSD experiment with hypnosis was probably the most traumatic because it was truly an experiment. It was 2 doctors in a room with me. I was given the LSD and asked a lot of questions. These were tape recorded. Then I was isolated for 24 hours with paper and pencil with nobody to talk to. And I was to write everything that came through my head. And then there were sessions where this was then played back. Some of the things were played back without the LSD. So no, there were not any role models. There were only doctors. And seclusion was the coin of the realm, you know. If you were having difficulty, you know, it was either medication or you could go into seclusion on your own. I left there and immediately went to the Connections and overdosed that evening and wound up in an alley where a friend found me on her way into the Connections house.
My name is Dawn Dixon. I am 32 years old. I'm a member of the Gila River Indian community. I am Akamerd Atham, and Irish. And I'm the proud mother of 4 beautiful children. My life basically consisted of me suffering through all of my memories and flashbacks of things that I experienced as a little kid. I spent so many years angry, in misery, with my only, what I thought was relief was using drugs, drinking. I didn't realize how much my childhood impacted the decisions I made as an adult. I was angry with the world, and I thought that the world consisted of people trying to hurt me. I really believed in my heart that happiness was for other people and not me. I looked at my life as a downward spiral, and I basically thought that I was going to die with a needle in my arm. I thought that I was, and I kind of accepted that fact. I believed at the time that my children deserved better than me, and it was something that I felt like I couldn't provide. I was hopeless, I was angry, I was hurt. I accepted my misery and I kind of welcomed it. I lived in Gila River for the first 5 years of my life. In that period, I was taken from my mom 2 or 3 times. Not really sure. But when I started writing my life story, I realized that my first memory was of watching a 7-week-old baby get killed in front of me. My mom and her friend came home drunk, and the mom of the baby, her friend, stumbled over me and my sisters and kicked her baby in the head and broke its neck. She thought it was a doll. I lived in that chaos with my mom selling drugs, where we had no food in the fridge, but they had pounds of weed in the freezer. I remember being 4 years old and my dad telling me that a doctor was going to come over and give us our shots. This guy showed up in a white jacket, white coat-like thing, and asked us to sit at the table. They proceeded to tie off our arms, and I didn't know at the time, but they shot us up with heroin, me and my sisters. My mom was murdered in a field. She was raped. They chopped off her hair and then ran her over with the truck repeatedly. I still remember the pictures that they showed us of her tattoos. They're like, is this your mom's tattoo? And I remember sitting in a room with the officers and saying, yes, I know that's my mom's tattoo. And it was basically a picture of a tattoo with blood splattered on it. You could see pieces of hair, like cut. I remember feeling kind of sad, but also feeling relief at the same time. Being at the funeral and not even being able to cry because I felt like, okay, she can't hurt me no more. Okay. I buried things down and I told myself that I would never say them out loud. They were mine to keep. My secrets were mine. Coming here, I realized that they dictated my decisions. They chose my life path. I feel like I found my voice in being able to express my traumas, express the entirety of my experiences without judgment. I feel like people not judging me or putting me down, but encouraging me, has given me the opportunity to embrace those parts of myself. I feel like that's where I get my voice at. I strongly believe in integrity. I strongly believe in doing the right thing when nobody's watching. I feel like that's what makes my voice a little bit stronger, is that I'm going to be me regardless of who's around or who's watching. And a lot of times you don't realize how far you've gone until you look back. Through this process, I realized it's not about why, it's what. Like, what now? What are you going to do with it? Naya told me in order to heal from my past, I have to remember it. And I remember thinking, that's the bad part. I don't want to remember it. And then she comes back and says, by the way, remember means to pass through your heart again. I analyzed that, and my interpretation of it means that I have to emotionally attach to my trauma so I can work through them. This has by far been the most difficult, most rewarding thing that I've ever done with my life. I am grateful now for every day that I have. Every morning that I wake up my kids, and every night that I go to sleep knowing that I did everything I could to help people around me. I believe that despite what culture, creed, race we come from, we're all one. We're all the same essence. I embrace that. And when I'm able to do that on a spiritual level within Sweat and within my culture, I feel whole again. Maya Angelou talks about sharpening your pencil on the scars of your past. And I feel like that's something that I've tried to do to the best of my ability. But yes, I've been through a lot. But not without vain. Not in vain. I went through that so that I can help other people. I'm really into embracing today. I'm a person that's really mindful of the fact that tomorrow isn't promised. That what we have is the moment we live in and we have today. Today I will do this. Today I will help people. Today I will embrace life. Today I will take the opportunity to continue to heal from my wounds and help others to heal. I feel like if I can comfort one person that day, I was successful. If if I can hear one person's story and look one person in the eye and let them know that they're not alone, that gives me comfort.
My name is Sheila Schrader, and I'm 66 years old. I came to Amity in 1984 when I was 31. I was in a lot of trouble. I was in jail. I had 2 daughters that I did not take care of well. One of them I exposed to much of the drug use that I was participating in at the time, and the other one I had just kind of pawned her off on my stepmother, who I knew wasn't a healthy person for her to be with. By the time I had gotten myself to prison, I had been pretty much shaped by a violent, strict, very, very hardworking family, kind of an old school redneck, and the idea of college was never even ever talked about. It was you had to learn how to work, and you were going to learn it. You were going to learn it hard. I think the tipping point for my self-destruction was during my senior year in high school at the age of 17, my brother shot and killed my father. I got strung out on heroin. I ended up prostituting. I ended up, robbing people, doing all the things they say that you do when you do heroin. Took me down a path to where I finally was in jail for the last time, and I was going to go to prison, but that process was interrupted by Amity, who had a relationship with the Pima County Jail at that time, and they came to interview me. One of the very first concepts that I tuned into, I had been clean probably 6, 7, 8 months when my eyes started popping open, my ears started hearing, was the paradigm paralysis or paradigm shift concept. Of course, all of us are anxious to go back home to what's familiar and all of those things, but that's something that I heard, and it prompted me, and at that time it was long term, it was 18 months. So that gave me time to study these issues that had shaped me, and to look at the ideas of changing your paradigm and so forth, and time to do that. I knew I wanted to go home and show everybody my new shiny self, but I knew they wouldn't see it, really. I also knew that when I went there, I needed to have a shift in me that was going to be strong enough to navigate that environment around people I still loved, but that they hadn't changed. So all of that came to my understanding through the concept of paradigm paralysis and paradigm shift. It was the biggest thing I would say that kept me from going there and trying to, seek approval, which is what we all want to do when we go back home, and so forth. So that I really believe, and I use that in teaching as much as I can. And I have to say that I actually did get caught up in family issues, again, in unhealthy ways over the years, but still had enough understanding of what was happening to keep myself safe and pull myself out in that way. And things have changed so much over the years that at this point, most of the people in my family have either died or they've had to change too, to be alive. So, with all of that in mind, we've all kind of, those of us who were able to start hearing each other and so forth, and draw the boundaries that we needed within those relationships and reshape those relationships, we've all come to a much happier place, with much healthier children and grandchildren, and my family has grown to be a much stronger family than it used to be, and a much more loving family.
Hi, my name is Jesse Losoya, originally from California. Grew up in a home with my grandmother and my siblings. After being adopted by my grandmother at the age of 6 due to some abuse as a child from the hands of my stepfather, led me and my brother and sister into the foster care system, and around the age of 6 we were adopted out by my grandmother. growing up in my grandmother's home, a lot of confusion, you know, a lot of thoughts of feeling unloved, thoughts of being abandoned, what was wrong with me, and then going to school was really tough growing up in school. A lot of ridicule, a lot of bullying, and around the age of 14 years old, I ran away from home. I ran away scared, lonely, not a big, strong guy. I thought to myself, like, where am I going to go and what do I do from here? And so then I found refuge in a gang in Anaheim, California. Once I got in that, I kind of just lost interest in sports or school, and eventually I dropped out of school. And that's when I really kind of elevated myself into more crime. I started using drugs probably at the age of 15 years old. Started light, you know, smoking some weed and drinking and a little LSD, which then eventually led to me smoking coke and then crack. And then I stayed doing that for some time until I started using meth. Partook in a lot of violence, had a lot of violence, you know, happen to me. Some of my best friends were murdered. One of my best friends was murdered and shot and died in my arms in California. And in that same year is when I was shot myself. I got hit in the back with a 9mm and really thought, you know, this could be the end after I just lost my friend earlier that year, thinking that I might be dying. And luckily I didn't, and thankfully I was not paralyzed. I was able to walk out of there in a couple of days, and really made me think on what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And one of the thoughts to myself is I was already dealing with something personally. I had a secret. You know, I'm gay, and nobody in my neighborhood or in this gang knew that. It's probably one of the most scariest moments in my life. I mean, picture, if you will, having to come into a room of like 50 gang members and just say, you know, hey, I'm gay. To me, it was a pretty tremendous step, really walking through some pretty fearful times in my life. And I moved away from that, and I left there. But one thing I didn't leave behind was the addiction that I had already carried with me. I was probably using meth for about 6 years now. So after leaving this gang, I found myself on the streets again. Didn't have any resources, didn't have a job, didn't have any family connection. Basically was starting life all over again with a serious meth addiction. I put myself in all kinds of compromising situations for room and board, for drugs, which eventually led me to doing some burglaries, some petty thefts, breaking into homes, stealing from friends, which then led me to some jail time. And over the course, things didn't change, and I eventually got arrested for a robbery charge. And after that, after being convicted, I was sent to a place called Delancey Street in Los Angeles for 2 years. And after leaving there, I really hadn't done much work while given that 2 years. I really didn't get honest about my life and open up as I wish I could have at the time. And then I found myself relapsing about 6 or 7 months later. Got arrested again, this time for a second-degree robbery charge. I was sentenced to prison for 4 years. And in that time, I had some serious time to sit and really evaluate on what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And I paroled from prison in January of 2011. Reached out to my parole agent and I said, you know, is there any other options for me to another place that I can go? And he did say, you can go to a place called Amity Foundation. And the name Amity Foundation, when he told me this, I remembered watching a video in prison called Lifers. And the work that was being done on that video and the people that were working with the Lifers at that time was moving to me. And when he said that, it was like, without a doubt, I was like, yes, I want to go there. So in January 2011, I came to Amity. And when I enrolled there, I didn't really think that I was going to stay long because I was given about 6 months to be there from my parole agent. And in that time, I made some connections with some guys there that eventually became friends, that people that are in my life still today that I consider friends. It was actually my big brother that kept me there. It was a gentleman by the name of Peter, and he kept coming by and he kept saying, "You can do this, kid. You can do this, kid." He was so much older than I was. And he checked on me every day, and he came to my room and he was like, "You need a shot of coffee," and he put it in an envelope. And he would always give it to me, because I didn't have anything at that moment. But then I realized that I had exactly what I needed. You know, there was something going on here at that very moment that it was like, you don't need anything, like all the material things that I swore that I needed before, I didn't need that any longer. And that's what did it for me. You know, that was the buy-in. So nearing the 6 months that I had been there, I was asked if I was going to go out and look for a job, or if I wanted to stick around and be a part of Amity a little longer. And I think it's because of the friendships I had made with some of the guys there. I wanted to be around a little longer, and I didn't really know what that looked like at the time, but I knew, hey, you know what? I have some friends in my life, I have some good people, I have some people that care about me, and so I decided to stay. During my time as a student at Amity, I had a lot of time to really learn, kind of reflect on my life's journey, tap into my childhood, tap into some of the things that I thought I would take to the grave. I was able to talk about some of the hard things that happened in my life. And a lot of things that people did, you know, the extensions of trust that were given, or when people started depending on me or being needed. I think something happened internally. There was a shift there because, I mean, people hadn't trusted me for years. And it was something that really boosted my thoughts a bit about, I can do this. You know, I can be trusted, and I can really be an honest man. I really could really change. And so I'm extremely proud of the man I am today. I feel that I've come a really long way from where I was. I've been with Amity now about a decade. A lot of things I've achieved along the way. One of the things that I'm really proud of is being able to really reconnect with my family, really reconnect with my grandmother. We've had the best relationship up to her passing. She was a part of this journey with me for about 5 years. I'm glad to have been able to really make her proud before leaving this earth. I'm really proud to have my brother and my sister in my life today. My brother's here with us today. I am really proud at the fact that I was able to go back to court, but this time on just different circumstances, and be able to clean up my record. That was a moment that I don't think that I would have imagined, sitting in that prison cell, that one day I would be doing that. And I'm really proud of my marriage, having lived that life for so long. Never would have thought I'd be married to my husband today. Has really kind of been the icing on the cake, per se. You know, I'm really grateful. I'm really happy for the life I have today. So.
My name is Matea, and I am 32 years old. I got sober at 26, and I started using at 11 years old. You know, my life is a testament to the power of media, because my addiction began when I saw a movie called Trainspotting, which really glorified the use of intravenous drugs. And I became really obsessed and fascinated, and that's the path I began walking. And I stayed a drug addict for 15 years, and it took me to depths and depraved living that was so far beyond what I had seen in that movie. And, you know, one of the things that really stands out to me about that life was that that actually ended up being a key for me for my sobriety was the my terrible diet and the rampant misogyny. So being a young girl addicted to drugs, homeless on the streets, violence was a part of my everyday life, and it was a part of my life predominantly at the hands of men. So I was severely abused, and I couldn't understand why every guy I would get with it would just be the same cycle over and over. And my internalized misogyny was so ingrained that I would even brag about it. I would brag about how many beatings I could take and openly scorn and mock women who cried or complained at being beat by men, because she should be tougher than that. She should be able to take it. And I lived off of these abuses and gas station food and McDonald's. So everything I took in through all my senses was completely toxic. And the way this ended for me was education, like media, exposure to media played a huge role in bringing me down to that level. And it also played a huge part in my awakening as well. My day-to-day life led me, selling drugs. I got busted several times for distributing meth, selling meth. And when I got out of prison, this last time at 26, I just happened to see a documentary about food, about a plant-based diet. And when I saw how farm animals were being treated and what those foods were doing to the body, I had never made the connection. I thought that it was only drugs that could affect the way you think and the way you see the world. But these documentaries, I started watching more and more, and I started realizing that anything you put into your body has the power to affect the way you see the world, your mood, your anxiety, your depression. Your personality is largely dependent on what you take in. So I changed my diet overnight. And when I started learning about the way animals are treated, it made me also interested in feminism and the way women are treated. And it opened my eyes to all the injustice that I felt, that other women in addiction feel, that women of color feel, women all over the world. And so I became really activated. Like my whole way I saw the world, my whole paradigm shifted, and it opened the door to a more compassionate mind state for myself, for other women, for the animals, for the planet that we all share. And these passionate interests drove me and guided me to Amity, which is sort of a miraculous thing, because now in Amity, I get to be a part of that education. I get to be a part of that media, hopefully to help others. And since coming here, I have changed even more as a person. Amity has taught me about friendship, about the importance of deepening our connections with other women. I find myself more able to confront difficult topics with my close friends. I have a whole new language of communicating my feelings with other people. And I feel more confident, because when I came here, I was a former addict, former convict, plant-based chef. And now I don't have to define myself with any negative terms whatsoever. My experience with that life has enriched me and made me a better teacher. I'm now a yoga teacher here at Amity. Hopefully I'm an example that there is hope in darkness for other women. I get to make media and be a part of so many different educational and culinary projects here.
My name is Peter Starks. I'm 71 years old, born and raised in LA. And I have to say that that's where a lot of my trauma started all through life. Come from an alcoholic family, a lot of domestic violence, raised up in church, had issues with God most of my life. because he didn't stop none of the drama, none of the beatings that my mother went through with different men. I had six. I used to say I had 6 stepfathers. I didn't have 6 stepfathers. She had 6 husbands after my dad. And I went in the hardest branch of the Marine Corps. I went in the hardest branch of the military to learn how to kill somebody, so that the next person to put their hands on my mama, I put a pistol down their throat and take them out and try to wake them up. No, I don't want them to die too fast. And not have a conscience, because I was raised up in church. Went in the Marine Corps at 17 years old. Went to, after my basic training and everything in 1966, I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where I saw men coming back from Vietnam, crazy as all outdoors, and that's what I wanted. And I remember landing in, when I arrived, I had this John Wayne mentality that I was gonna come back a hero after killing up a bunch of folks and be prepared to, whoever my mother was married to, was gonna take their life with no problem. And I remember landing, 5 minutes after I arrived, we got hit with mortars and I saw legs and arms flying by me. I froze, I was pissing on myself, ran to a foxhole filled with monsoon rainwater, and scared to death, and saw this fifth of liquor being passed around, and I took my first drink, and I felt pretty good. You know, it took the fear, it relieved the pain and the scaredness, and then around came this cigar, or I thought it was a cigar. It was about the size of a cigar, and it was some Vietnam weed mixed with opium, and I hit that, and the moment that took over the feeling, I knew that me and God were cool, and that was the way I was supposed to feel for the remainder of my life. So for the next 12 months and 26 days, every second that I was awake, I was high. I was wounded twice. They tried to send me home the first time I got wounded, and I refused to because I wanted to stay with my guys. The first time I trusted anybody in my life was with the guys that I was over in Nam with. And I still hold that. I held that same thought process all the way up until I got to Amity Foundation. I didn't know anything about being addicted to anything, and I remember talking to we'll call him OG, older dope fiend, and he was somebody that knew my father, and he told me about. I was talking to him about my experience in Nam and told him how I was feeling. I felt like I was sick. He said, "Oh, Peter, I got something for you." So he went and got a balloon of heroin. I didn't know what it was. He let me snort it, and it took away all that flu-like symptoms. And I did that for about a month before I stuck my arm out and let somebody inject some heroin into my veins. And for the next 40 plus years, I shot heroin. I began a lifetime of crime. I was very anti-government because, us Vietnam veterans are treated like, I don't want to cuss, but, we were treated like dogs. We weren't, and in many ways we still are, and I went through that and I carry that to this day. And so, what I did was resign myself to being by myself. I still feel I was the most compassionate person that I know, but I knew that my life was altered. My family was afraid of me. They would not tell me any problems that they had because I know, I had no balance, emotional balance. So I would go 0 to 100 in a heartbeat. And you mess with my family or my circle of friends, which I didn't have any, my response was not going to be good. And I had no problem with that. And so in and out of prisons for maybe 13, 14 years. I don't know how many years I spent in the county jail system. I got introduced to Amity December 22nd, Christmas Day of '08. At Soledad State Prison, and it was the first time in my adult life that I didn't use any chemicals. In and out of jails, I use drugs. So when people ask me, in your 40 plus years of addiction, how many times have you relapsed? I never relapsed because I never was clean. I'm gonna find something to put in my system, and I couldn't imagine life without that. What are you doing when you parole? Are you gonna parole to homelessness like I always do? Yes. And I'm take my $200 gate money and go straight to the dope man because I never report to a PO, ever. Catch me when you can from the gate. And I remember being released with $200 gate money. I wasn't paying a dime to get from Northern California to LA, but they had somebody there with a big sign saying Amity Foundation, Peter Starks. And so I asked him if he was going to drive me to LA. He said, no, I'm going to take you to San Jose Airport and you're going to fly. I said, well, who's paying for the ticket? Not me. And they had a ticket and an itinerary and all that. Flew to LA. They had somebody waiting in the baggage area when I was picking up this little box that had all my life in that little box, paperwork, California Department of Corrections. That impacted me. Nobody knew what was here. Everybody knew what was on that black and white paper, this criminal. I remember sitting on that sofa at Amistad, and they gave me this paper that talked about Amity and all this, and I think I was there about 20 minutes. And this student was sitting behind the desk. And he said, hey, man, is your name Peter Starks? I said, yeah, why, man? He said, you got a phone call. And I cussed him out viciously. You trying to front me off and I'm not even here yet. You know, I haven't even been in the program and you know, because I had this prison mentality. And it was a demonstrator from South State Prison that saw, I cussed him out when I first met him. And he said he was the first one that I remember saying that he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And he called 20 minutes after I'm there to check and see if I made it. And I treasure that moment. And I went through my whole first year and a half wrestling with letting people in. You know, because I didn't trust nobody but my squad. You know, don't tell me you love me, show me you love me. Don't tell me how to live life, show me how to do it. I don't believe nothing nobody say in and of itself. To this day. And Amity, you know, I've cussed out a lot of people for showing me love. They'd spank me and show me love all at the same time. And I'm still here. And what Amity did was the people that are my mentors and my friends, they took care of me. They understood, they showed me. You know, they still to this day, they tell me, they remind me that I'm a diamond in the rough. What I treasure more than anything, I have some authentic relationships today that people love and accept me just as I am. I'm trusted just as I am. And I'm not gonna change. You know, I wouldn't change that for anything. I just bought a home. I spent 30 years homeless. I used to, I still say it with pride, I could build you a 3-bedroom cardboard condo that you would be comfortable in. And I have people tell me, oh, no, I wouldn't. Yes, you would, or commit suicide then. You know, I've eaten out of many garbage bins. You know, today I have a 4-bedroom house that I brought for myself, my son, and my grandson. I got dogs that I cherish. I have a sanctuary. I made my house a home. And I wouldn't trade my life for nothing in the world.
So, About almost 20 years ago now, we made a little film called TC Pioneers. We got some of the people who were involved with therapeutic communities at the very, very beginning and interviewed them together. The thing that came across in that video was people said, I had worked with people for years, and about the best we got was sort of symptom removal or some relief from the symptoms that they were suffering from. And what I saw in the therapeutic community was something I'd never seen before. Entire lives transformed, entire identities changed, so that you couldn't even recognize the person anymore, except, you know, physically.
But I was seeing things there. And what I was seeing was something that I believed that you never saw. And that is, you saw entire lives changed. You know, as a professional, as a psychologist, you know, what you get is people come in, you can remove a symptom, maybe you can help somebody, you know, you feel a bit better. But to see lives changed, people, their entire way that they looked at themselves, they looked at the world, the way they conducted themselves, and then these dramatic changes from social deviancy to social productivity. And along with that, a lot of psychological changes, even psychiatric improvements, you know. So aside from my feeling personally moved by the groups and the things that went on, that happened to me in groups, I saw these, as a psychologist, I saw these very powerful changes. I have to tell you, it's that, my own conclusion then, that this was a very, there was something powerful here.
That was this incredible paradigm shift. And what you've just seen is an example of that occurring in people's lives. And what I hope in this lecture or presentation is that you are inspired by the fact that this not only happens occasionally, it happens all the time, all over the world in communities like Amity. And there are many, many thousands of them around the world, where people come to a safe place, where people have the expectation of transformation, the expectation that you can change, that your life can be completely different than it has been in the past, that your own very low expectations of yourself can be cast aside, and you can begin to really get on a path that might have been inconceivable for you before, and achieve things that you never thought were achievable. And I'm not just talking about material things, getting things, but in terms of relationships, rich, meaningful relationships, which are probably the most important thing we ever have in our lives. If you have a rich tapestry of friendship, no matter what else you've got, you're wealthy. And no matter how wealthy you are, if you do not have friends, you're poor. You are spiritually in poverty. And so this is about, you know, it's great. We know that paradigms can flip in science. We know that they can flip in psychology. We hope they can flip in terms of the climate, the planet we live on. But they can flip for you, and they should. So take advantage of the opportunity to get out of paradigm paralysis and make a paradigm shift.